Hello everyone, this is update for November 22, 2022, day 272 of the war and of the date update. Uh, just a just a sort of general announcement. We're finishing 10th month of the war, so uh, almost anniversary in a couple days. Otherwise, let's just start as always with general topics, and then we're gonna switch to the battlefield. So let's talk a little bit about Russia and Russian economy, as sort of always in Russian energy, which is part of the economy. So first, Russia has become largest supplier of nitrogen fertilizer to India, and and it controls record 25% of the market, being number one supplier of nitrogen fertilizer to India. Just a reminder for those who haven't watched previous videos. Basically, nitrogen fertilizer is basically natural gas. So basically, it's a conversion of natural gas into nitrogen fertilizer and creating a little bit more added value. So as you can see, Russia still sort of have strong export, and sort of the flow of foreign exchange is still happening there without much problem. Then European now a little bit more discussing on energy. European Commission proposed the ceiling on Russian natural gas, and that ceiling is going to be 3,000. Well, I think US dollars or euros doesn't matter. 3,000. It's a US dollars or per thousand cubic meters. So that's actually about the price that it's currently is. Right now, it's oscillates slightly above 1,000 euros for 1,000 cubic meters. So this ceiling is essentially kind of like meaningless, I would say. Not to mention, not I'm definitely thinking that all of the ceilings are completely useless, futile, just basically empty posturing that don't lead anything in. And if anything, if they were real, they would actually hurt economies of the West. So they're completely counterproductive. Nevertheless, there is this posturing happening. Well, at least it's harmless so far, posturing. There's also a report that on Wednesday, US and Europe will introduce ceiling on Russian crude oil, and the rumored number is between 60 and 70 US dollars per barrel, which essentially close to what Russia is selling the crude at. Usually it's about 75. Now might be, with the oil a little bit going down, might be, within the range. So again, this ceiling is in a way, even though in this case it's much closer to actual price, but it's sort of nominal ceiling, and hopefully it will not damage sort of world economy and Western's economy. As a result, the only way it may hurt if prices for crude go up, but at the same time, Russia already announced that it's not going to sell its crude to the countries that joined this crude ceiling alliance. And as I mentioned before, there are calculations that show that it makes sense for Russia to basically stop producing about 2 million barrels per day. Just for a reminder, Russia produces about 11. And so dropping it to about 9 or even 8.5 would be actually more beneficial to Russia, because the prices for crude on the world market would actually probably rise. So as a result, Russia would get more revenue. So that would more than cover drop in the production based on estimates. And that really makes sense because OPEC is pretty tight, is not willing to sort of release extra oil, and then Russia reducing it. So effectively, the world supply is becoming smaller. So the prices probably will go up on crude. So in any ways, Russian well, there is expectation in the West that Russian crude oil production will drop to about 9.6 million in 2023. Whether those expectations substantiated or not, I'm skeptical actually, because there was expectation at the beginning of the war that Russian crude production will drop pretty quickly, also to about 9 million barrels per day. And that never really materialized, even though the Western oil field services companies, for the large extent, left Russia. They still able to sort of maintain production, and that's more related to the situation that it's super easy, super cheap to extract oil in Russia. So you really don't need that much of high tech, essentially. I mean, it's helpful, but it's not as critical. However, let's just look. Next step is look. Let's look at the Russian state budget, which kind of is in a way a reflection of the economic situation in Russia. Russian government expects essentially for 2023 revenues of about 26 trillion Russian rubles, which is you just need to divide by 60. I don't know, like half a trillion, a little bit less than half a trillion of US dollars. So let's say 450 billions of US dollars. And the expenses are 29 trillion. So last year the revenue was 25 and expenses I believe were like 23.5, so there was actually surplus. That's why I said that the whole state finances situation in Russia was extremely pristine and run pretty well. At this point, the expense is 29, so it's a deficit of 3 trillion, which is looks like it's almost like a 12% relative to revenue. That's pretty huge deficit, and really kind of tells us that Russian economy is getting into worse and worse shape as time passes by. The other interesting point about this Russian state budget that about a third of it, of 33%, will go to finance basically war and also to finance police, which makes a lot of sense. You need to finance military, but also need to finance police, so it keeps population sort of under control. So that's about it for Russia. Now let's switch to China, where, as we mentioned, there's a lot of going on. There's active moves on both Western and Chinese side to build alliances. And so, for example, U.S. Vice President went to Philippines, which is kind of like a U.S. stronghold in the Pacific, or sort of jumping board at least. There is desire to sort of have Philippines as such, and Vice President warned against attack on Philippines. I would say that's sort of really strange because China is definitely not trying to attack Philippines by any means. So obviously the goal is Taiwan. So there was also a meeting between the Chinese Minister of Defense and U.S. Minister of Defense, and where basically Chinese Minister of Defense was very direct, very straightforward, saying that Chinese military is capable of sort of securing Taiwan, let's put this way, and it will respond with a strong resolve to any U.S. measures on Taiwan. So basically, that's kind of like a warning to the U.S. Stay out or else. And what's going to be for else, we'll find out. I would say, not relatively soon. Let's put this way. And then another interesting point on their new, basically, on the new Chinese sort of top in the military, that it's actually even more inclined to use military force to resolve Taiwan situation than even political leadership. But political leadership, I mean Chinese president and his group that essentially seized power during this Communist Party meeting that happened, I think, early November. So at this point, basically, the Chinese military even more hawks relative to the political top. Um, at the same time, situation in China is getting worse by day. Real estate bubble has popped completely, and basically we're gonna see more and more fallout. There's a lot of censorship, so there's not much of information kind of like leaking out, but it's very clear that situation is pretty bad. There's also hit towards to sort of Chinese exports, so the pressure inside of Chinese society is building up, and at some point, the Chinese top will be pressured to release to relieve that pressure in that pressure cooker in some shape or form. And one obvious one is to start this invasion of Taiwan and release all of that negative energy in that direction. So there and in terms of all of this recent US and Chinese negotiations, it looks like the whole point of all of these negotiations is not to sort of even prevent conflict over Taiwan, which looks like it's almost sort of certain, but it's more about discuss not you basically to ensure that neither party will use nuclear weapons. Basically, at this point, the conversation is not so much about sort of conventional conflict, but it's more about like, okay, let's just make sure we don't use nuclear weapons in the process. So that's just my impression, basically, by looking at all of this and what's going on. That basically, U.S. wants to make sure that nuclear weapons are not going to be used in the process, and that's all it is. But I think sort of psychologically there is sort of understanding and agreement that this is inevitable at this point. Also, sort of less important, but still, the Mongolian president is going to visit China pretty soon. So again, this is talking about building alliances. Even Mongolia is essentially almost under Chinese control. Used to be under Soviet Union control. Now it's sort of more under Chinese control anyway. So that's China at least have a very secure position there in Mongolia, which has some important natural resources. So that's it for today from a point of view of strategic sort of developments. Now let's actually switch to Ukraine. In terms of situation with electricity grid, it's still functioning barely functioning. Let's put it this way. Another round of attacks will definitely put an end to it if that happens. And when that's going to happen is obviously in the hands of the Russian political top. Then let's actually look. Let's just walk through the battlefield in a typical fashion, starting from the north and then going in a clockwise fashion. So the situation along the state border here between the two countries is fairly quiet. There is not much of exchange of artillery fire. Now let's move to North Lugansk front line and see what's going on there. Things here are predictably the same. You can almost check the clock. So again, Ukrainian troops trying to attack this Kuzemivka area to basically advance here on this road to Svatove. And as before, they don't achieve much. And just a refresher for those who relatively knew why they're not achieving much is because Ukrainian command is not capable of organizing troops for successful attack. And that what that really means is Ukrainian side is not destroying Russian artillery. And so as a result, Ukrainian troops kind of basically doing suicidal attacks and fended off by Russian artillery or fire, by the Russian artillery fire. So that's pretty much how all of these attacks end up. And then they just result in a unnecessary loss of human life. And then Russian troops are also trying to counterattack to kind of keep Ukrainian command on its toes, but also at least here it's very clear just a counterattack. There is not much of a sort of plans beyond just keeping Ukrainian side busy. But anyways, situation essentially at this point stalemate here. And as I said before, given that Russia is going to get more dismobilized recruits, things are essentially very firmly in a positional situation. In a way, sort of reminds how it was in World War One, where it's superposition. Situation is very positional, and the only way to get out of it is to get qualitative advantage, which, given that Ukrainian command is not, is not sort of, I'd say, does not know how to do it, let's put this way, or does not want, or combination of all of that, and not to mention even Ukrainian political top is completely, from other planet in this respect. So without increasing quantity of the Western weapons and quality, doesn't look like there is much to be done here at this point by Ukrainian side. Now let's move to North Donbass front line, where Wagner mercenaries operating. Since we're pretty active today, Wagner mercenaries are actively attacking Ukrainian side. So far, they have not succeeded today. At the same time, based on observation, they do inflict sizable casualties on Ukrainian defenders, which is not a good sign in the first place, because if you are, good at defensive warfare, you should not have high losses. Basically, looks like Ukrainian side is holding the front line by trading people lives, soldier lives for time, which means that this is situation of attrition, and eventually that may lead to breakthrough of the Russian troops here, which we've been observing over time. But everything here is super slow, and from a perspective of Ukrainian perspective here, situation can be only resolved by some kind of like counteroffensive that's aimed at encircling Wagner mercenaries, basically attacking from flanks, from the rear, and so on, creating basically panic and collapse. Otherwise, in the sort of straight defensive warfare, it's a slow loss by death, basically, as I said, death by thousand cuts of the Ukrainian side. Yes, and then I just want to mention, just to be fair, Wagner mercenaries also sustained very high losses, but the way it's sort of viewed inside of Russia and the Russian political top is they basically dumping down, trading sort of low quality human material for what they believe is some strategic success or tactical success. From that perspective, there is not much of a loss for the Russian society. I'm just explaining how it's being viewed within the Russian top. So they don't mind to sort of, it's in a way, and it's not right, but the way it's really viewed is like, okay, we basically advancing military. At the same time, we're cleansing society from within, from sort of like low quality material. And that just means that there will be more and more of these waves of Wagner mercenaries that will be sort of attacking Ukrainian troops here. So now let's move a little bit south, see what's going on here. Things are, again, sort of similar. Active day, attacks south of Bakhmut. So, Russian side is active everywhere, trying to kind of move forward, let's put it this way. Now let's look what's going on at central Donbass front line. Things here also kind of active. The same idea. Russian command is trying to outflank Avdiivka and force withdrawal of Ukrainian troops. So far, not much really success today. And again, this is everything is so extremely predictable, like moves of the Russian command. And if Ukrainian command were any capable of anything, this is extremely easy to disrupt. Extremely, because they're hammering in the same place, day after day, months after months, and you can always maneuver your artillery and so on to basically disrupt all of these attempts. At the same time, it's never been done. So basically, Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield, on the front line, basically plugging this front line with their own lives, without much of proper artillery support. Because again, this is war of artillery. This is the key, and without it, without sort of interaction and integration of artillery and infantry, the defensive fight turns into trading lives for time, essentially, which is losing proposition for Ukraine, because it's at least I would say 3.5 times smaller country, just simply does not have enough resources to basically trade people for time, because Russia understands this very well, and eventually, and it continues sort of doing this and is not planning to stop, and eventually this will lead to negative result for Ukraine. Now let's look at Marinka. Russian side basically reporting that there is some advance in the northern part of Marinka. Whether it's true or not remains to be seen. I'll provide update as there is more confirmation, but it's being a lot of sort of Russian propaganda, victories that turn out later that is all fake. But I wanted to kind of like mention it just in case. Then there is also attacks in Novomykhailivka that don't go anywhere. But essentially, the whole situation is doesn't really move much anywhere at this point. The situation in Pavlivka is essentially quiet at this point. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. Things here are quiet. There's definitely not much movement. There's also no information as to what is Ukrainian command doing with this Kherson bridgehead group and the Russian command. So I haven't seen these units popping up on the battlefield here, in southern and eastern Ukraine yet. Once I have that, I'll provide update. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.